Okay, so we're about ready to get started, Chair Langberg. And if I just remind anyone who is on Zoom to make sure your computer is muted so we don't get feedback from you.
Okay, we can start then. All right, welcome everyone to the Design Review Board meeting, July 25th. Let's do a roll call, if you would, please.
Lynn Diedler. Here. Marshall Balf. Here. Christine Level.
Here.
Carrie Bush.
Here.
Vice Chair Henley.
Present.
And Chair Langberg.
Here.
All right, we have all members in attendance today.
Thank you, John. So we have some minutes to approve from 3 different meetings. Going back to November 16th of last year would be the first one. So of that, Marshall, Melissa, and Carrie were the members of the board that are here that were at that meeting. So if you three, any comments or questions on those minutes?
I didn't have any comments.
No.
Yeah, no comments as well.
Okay,
I'll be glad to make a motion.
Yes,
to
please.
approve the minutes as delivered.
Okay, do I have a second?
Second.
Marshall seconds, okay. Can I have a vote on those minutes?
Marshall Balf. Your vote.
Aye.
Carrie Bush.
Aye.
And Melissa Henley.
Aye.
All right, those minutes for November 16th pass with a vote of 3-0 with 3 abstentions or 4 abstentions, I think.
4 with Ted.
Yeah, 3 with Ted no longer being on the board anymore.
All right, thank you. Then our next one is from January 18th of this year. And all that were at the meeting are at this meeting. So any comments or questions on the minutes from the January 18th meeting?
No.
Okay, would someone like to make a motion to approve? Or make a motion?
Sure, I'll also be happy to make that motion to approve the minutes as noted.
Okay, do I have a second?
Second.
Marshall seconds, okay. Vote, please.
Lynn Diedler.
Aye.
Marshall Balf.
Aye.
Chair Langberg.
Aye.
Vice Chair Henley.
Aye.
Carrie Bush.
Aye.
And Christine Level.
Aye.
All right, those minutes for January 18th pass with 6 ayes.
Okay, and then we have one more meeting of February 1st of this year. So Marshall and Melissa and myself were the only ones at that meeting, actually. So any comments or questions on those minutes? No? Do one of you like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Marshall, would you like to second?
So I'll second that.
Okay. We have a motion and a second.
Marshall Balf.
Aye.
Melissa Henley.
Aye.
And who was the last one? Lars Langberg. Chair
Aye.
Langberg. All right, that motion passes 3 ayes with 3 abstentions.
All right, great. Thank you, John. Thanks, everyone. Okay, and next on our agenda is the always exciting Planning Department update on matters of general interest.
All right, so just a few updates. As most of you know, the Woodmark project phase 1 for 48 units is under construction. There's a lot of grading work and site work going on right now. We also had the EIR scoping meeting for the City Ventures projects. That's the residential project behind the O'Reilly business office on the north end of town, just south of the charter school. We had that last Tuesday. We are still in the comment period and this is comments on items that people might think could be environmental concerns as we launch into the consultant preparing the environmental impact report. So we had a good meeting. There were quite a few neighbors last Tuesday, a lot of general questions about the project, but also some comments on that. If you all have any comments, I know some of you were here for the preliminary review before COVID. That project has changed a little bit to address some of the Planning Commission and Design Review Board comments at that time. And that information, the project drawings are up on our website, and John is the project planner for that. So any comments should go directly to him, and he will get them to the consultants. What else is happening? We did submit, or St. Vincent de Paul did submit a grant application to the state for funding for a permanent affordable housing project at the 845 Gravenstein Highway North. That's the site of the Horizon Shine Safe RV parking, which is a temporary use there. But they're looking at the general site plan that was approved, a mixed-use project that was approved by this board. I believe it expired in 2016 or 2017. But it's the general site plan with building forward to the street and parking behind. They are looking at going to one level. They will be coming, because that application has expired, they have submitted just the fees for design review. They're working on their package, and they will be submitting that, and they'll be coming to the DRB at some point late summer, early fall. Not sure when. It depends upon when they submit their materials. Let's see. We have been in contact with the Hotel Sebastopol. They are pending approval of their archaeology. It has been approved by the state now, is my understanding, and is at the federal level. That's part of their funding requirements. Archaeology is also part of the city's requirements for the MND mitigated neg deck CEQA work for that. So they're keeping their fingers crossed that the federal government moves quickly on it so that they can get started on that. So we're keeping in contact with them. They are moving along on the items that they can. They submitted their Caltrans encroachment permit, which is a pretty huge chunk of stuff if you've ever worked on one of those. And they're working with PG&E because they do have electrical crossing Brown Street, because if you recall that project, the hotel is on the main block, and across Brown Street is the parking lot. The parking lot has EV chargers as well as solar shading for the parking, and so that power crossing over to the hotel and back. They're working on the technical aspects with their city engineer and PG&E on that. We have received the building permit for the Habitat for Humanity, the 4 townhomes across from Safeway. So that project is also moving forward. And John and I had a meeting this morning with the county and Burbank Housing, who are going to be transitioning the Sebastopol Inn, now known as Elderberry Commons. They're working on, that will not come to the DRB because all of the modifications are internal to convert the hotel rooms to studio apartments. And then Burbank Housing and West County Community Services will be the operator for that. And their schedule is, well, they have not submitted the building permit. We know that will probably be a pretty quick thing. It's a pretty standard plan that they have for the kitchenettes being added to those rooms. And I think, and then we did actually receive a award of a $250,000 grant from ABAG MTC, that's the Association of Bay Area Governments, to look at flexible zoning along our commercial corridors, specifically kind of in between downtown and the south of town and downtown and the north gateway. And then also taking a look at Redwood Marketplace and what that might look like as a kind of mixed use development in the future. And so that is, you know, one of, when you look through this document, and we'll talk about that a little bit today in this meeting, the large sites where there's kind of breaking it into blocks, even if it's all under the same ownership, that's the type of site that standard, those design standards would apply to. Opticos is aware, when we work through all of this with the subcommittee and John, they're aware that the Redwood Marketplace, the owner there is interested in doing something in the future. And so that was kind of a good test case for that as we were going through that. But the grant we got, we'll probably start working on it in early 2024. It's like a 10-year grant period, but we don't want to wait that long. It is part of our implementation for our housing element to look at where we might adjust zoning. And so we're happy to have that. It allows us to move forward with probably some of the same consultants who worked on our housing element. and look at that sooner rather than later. So I think that's all I have, John.
Can I ask a quick question
got it
about
all.
the Habitat project? Does it look by and large similar to what we saw when they came to us?
Yeah, for the most part, it's pretty much the same. I believe the rooftop garden, they weren't able to make completely work out because of the structural requirements that were in place, and funds for that was one of the things that they had to revise from what you guys approved. I think it was last year. But other than that, the project is basically the same as what was approved.
Is the roof still habitable, or is it just not a habitable roof over the parking?
I believe it's still habitable, and you can go up there and maybe patio area or something like that. But as far as the green space for planting and
Sure.
community garden types of stuff, that is what they were hoping to see up there. That was something that they're unfortunately not able to put on there.
Great.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I
for
have two.
staff?
Regarding this $250,000 grant, what does that pay for exactly? A study, or, I mean, what exactly?
Yeah, so for what that will look at is right now, all of our commercial zones, you can have residential above the first floor and commercial on the bottom floor. We have had a number of proposals. Right now, to do 100% residential requires a use permit. So we've had a couple of proposals. One was a use permit for the structure at Healdsburg and Murphy, the very long construction project. There were two commercial cold shell spaces in there that they requested to be able to turn into apartments, which the Planning Commission approved. And then for the site next door as well, there was a preliminary review with their Planning Commission, and I believe the DRB as well, right? Yeah. If you recall that project, that just east of Healdsburg and on Healdsburg, just east of Murphy, that new project, Kathy Austin came before you to look at 100% residential there as well. And again, that would require a use permit with our Planning Commission. So one of the things that has come up, we got comments during our housing element, actually by members of the public here today, about the potential for allowing residential only in certain commercial zones. And so this grant will help us take a closer look at that and see, are there locations where that makes sense, and potentially change that zoning. So it would leave it up to an ordinance that could potentially, speed up the process for people who, in particular, in between, in those commercial stretches of Healdsburg, or the stretches of Healdsburg and Highway 116, whether it's Gravenstein Highway, South Main, or Healdsburg, whatever you want to call it, in different parts of town that aren't in the main commercial zones. Does it make sense to allow potentially with certain development standards? And this is where I've talked with Tony from Opticos about helping us with that, to allow residential only, or basically allow it to be flexible. It can be either commercial or residential or a mix. And, things can switch back and forth. So like in 20 years, if we have too much residential and not enough commercial, it could go back and forth and not be a burdensome process to the public to be able to do that residential only. And then it could also help us adjust any zoning or development standards for the larger commercial sites like Redwood Marketplace that are in that area.
So to simplify, there's a grant, a consultant will be involved, and we'll look at certain properties or lots in the commercial zone that would be able to develop residential only without applying for a use permit.
Correct. And it's not going to be a lot by lot. It will be like a zoning change is what I would anticipate.
So in this
and it may be
area,
an
you can do this?
overlay,
Yeah, okay.
or, it won't be like this parcel, and that parcel. That's spot zoning. That's actually illegal in California. But it could be that, if you have a corner lot here, then that's, wherever you are in that zone, there's certain standards. If you have frontage on a side street or frontage on Healdsburg. There are certain requirements, but then yes, you can do that without having to go through a use permit process. And then there is likely to be some CEQA work for that, so that we can pay for with the grant as well, any environmental review, as well as some potential infrastructure upgrades. So, you know, as we develop our general plan, has locations where we anticipate needing either signals or roundabout improvements, like at Covert Lane, Healdsburg, Murphy, and Furcrest. We can actually use funding from that grant to apply for some of the kind of the design and planning work to move that stuff forward as well.
So the 250,000 is strictly planning.
Strictly
then?
planning. It's not for
actual
construction.
physical-
Correct. Right.
Okay.
Yep.
So I have a question on Woodmark also. So they're doing the 48 units in phase one.
Mhm.
So in terms of my understanding of the RENA numbers, does their planned phase two count towards that, or is that only when it's a build out?
Only when they pull the building permits.
When they pull the
Yeah.
building permits?
Yeah.
And do they have an idea for when they're going to do that, or is it just up in the air?
You know, they intend to move forward fairly quickly, but they are looking for funding for that.
So is it possible that since, if I understand this correctly, with the SB 35, once we exceed that RENA number, people can't come in and make an application for an SB 35 until the next cycle?
New applications.
For the next cycle?
Yeah,
Until the next
sorry.
cycle, which it'll be re-upped. So
Well,
could,
it's not the next cycle. So right now, and this is, I can actually share this news as well. The state of California Housing and Community Development did come through with their determinations on cities and counties jurisdictions that are required to accept SB 35 applications, which is a big part of the work that we're doing here. And because we met and exceeded our targets in the last round, and because all of our annual reports are in order, we are not subject to SB 35 at this time. The state does, so our housing cycle with those housing targets is an 8-year cycle. The state does reevaluate progress in 4 years' time, halfway through the cycle. So in 4 years, if we're making progress, so we're basically 50% of the way there, then we would continue to not be subject. If we have not met those, and they do look at each income category, then we would be potentially again.
okay, so to understand this, sorry, it's all new to me. The SB 35, then somebody, since we were in compliance, then some developer cannot now come in with an SB 35
Correct.
project.
They would have to go through the whatever regular entitlement process there is.
So,
Yes.
so Woodmark got in there because at that point in time, we did not,
Correct.
and this will be reevaluated in 4 years.
Correct. Yep. And there is legislation in the state to make it permanent. The original SB 35, I think, sunsetted in 2035. Don't quote me on it, but I think that was about it. But there is state legislation looking at making this a permanent function of the housing elements in the state.
Okay, thank
So,
you.
and I'm going to cut us off there. If you have additional questions, please see me afterwards so that we're not taking up time in this meeting with detail on that, because we have a lot to go through today.
Okay, no further questions of staff then. So we can, I guess we should ask if there's any statements of conflicts of interest today on the board. Seeing none, then we'll move to our regular agenda item, the final draft of the objective design standards. So staff, you want to give us your report?
Sure. So the state of California has adopted legislation in recent years that impact the ability of local jurisdictions to implement their adopted discretionary design guidelines and requirements for certain residential projects, including certain multifamily residential projects via SB 35, and most recently SB 9, which is a single family residential lot split, and developing homes on newly subdivided lots or through the conversion of an existing single-family home into multiple units. In 2019, the Design Guidelines Subcommittee, which was created by the City Council to respond to these state laws, consists of Paul Fritz from the Planning Commission, Christine Level, and Lars Langberg from the DRB, and until his retirement from City Council, Patrick Slater. Just as a project background, staff began to work with the Design Guidelines Subcommittee and Opticos to develop these objective design standards, or ODDS, as you'll hear it referred to today, and also including SB9 standards. In September of 22, staff began work with Opticos, and in November of 22, the Design Guidelines Subcommittee had a kickoff meeting with staff and Opticos. Since then, these three parties have met several times to develop the ODDS that is presented here today. Once adopted, these standards can be used for SB 35 applications, which are exempt from normal discretionary design review, and also SB 9 standards, which will help develop requirements for lot splits of single-family zone parcels to be compliant with state law. I want to note that this document does not replace the existing design guideline standards. And with that, staff is recommending that the DRB review this document, provide any recommended modifications, and also further recommends that the DRB adopt the attached resolution today, recommending to the City Council adopt the objective design standards. With that, I will conclude my staff report, and if there's any questions from the board, I'd be happy to answer them. We also will be having a presentation from Opticos afterwards to go over the document in more detail.
Great. Thank you, John. Any questions for staff at this point?
I have
Lynn,
one.
go ahead.
What flexibility to change? Yeah, what flexibility is there to change if we adopt all these standards? If we feel in the future that we can improve them?
So that would go through, I believe, an amendment to a resolution from City Council.
Sure. So this would be adopted by resolution by City Council. It's under the design review part of our municipal code that allows them to adopt our discretionary design guidelines as well. So if they were to be changed in the future, it would be a resolution by council to adopt the changes. Probably wouldn't do an amendment. We'd probably just do a resolution just like we are for this one. So
It's just like the current process.
it's just like the current process. That's correct.
Any other questions of staff at this time? I just want to clarify one thing. So from my understanding, the subcommittee has gone through the objective design standards and we now have a final draft. The SB 9 standards are separate. So the staff report made it sound like they're kind of all together, but that's not the case.
Correct. Yes, the SB 9 standards will be coming back at a later time. That requires a zoning amendment because it's an ordinance change to our subdivision section of the municipal code. So with this document being adopted by a resolution, it's a easier process to start off with. And then SB 9 standards will come later as a ordinance amendment or adoption.
Okay, thank you. Okay, no other questions for staff, and I guess we're going to have Opticos.
And Chair
Chime
Leinberg,
in.
just let me add one more thing. For those of you who are going, okay, we're adopting these objective design standards. They only apply to SB 35, but we're not subject to SB 35. What the heck? So, right. So obviously this helps in the future. There is a potential that the city could decide to just adopt these for everything and not have discretionary design. We are not there right now. We certainly need to have these in place and see how they work and test them out. But the other component that this will help us with, and I won't go into detail again, you can talk to me after if you want to discuss more. The state of California does have a Housing Accountability Act. And basically the intent of that is to make sure that communities aren't being NIMBYs about projects and denying projects that in a way that would be illegal. So one of the things that this will help us for is that it does provide clarity in terms of what the city's expectations are if something were to come up with in that contingent. So even your discretionary projects, there's a lot of state law. I think I went through a couple months ago some of that information that applies to housing development in the state of California. This document certainly, in terms of, if you were to say no to something because it doesn't meet the design guidelines regarding grading or some sort of design feature or whatnot, you have to have a preponderance of evidence, in certain ways to be able to deny a housing project. This will help by making clear what the city's expectations are as a kind of a backup to your discretionary design guidelines. So the example I've always used is minimize retaining while minimize grading. What does that mean? In your discretionary standards, that is discretionary, and you look at it from a design lens on a case-by-case basis. In this document, we had to put numbers to it and metrics, and we've done that. If you were to, basically either provide advice to an applicant or deny a project because they aren't complying with that design guideline, and they're also not complying anywhere near these standards, then it makes a much better case to say, hey, this is beyond what the city allows. So there is kind of from a expectation setting for the community, it does help in that regard as well. So, and that's outside of SB 35, that's just under state housing law. Again, I don't want us to get bogged down in state law. I'm happy to have a conversation with any of you if you like outside of this meeting. But if there's no questions on that, I think we'll go ahead and turn it over to Opticos to get us started.
I have just one quick question, because it is my personal belief that the city will end up adopting this for everything, and we'll see a lot of cities doing that. So in the TCAC opportunity map, which I'm sure you're familiar with, which is part of the RENA final draft, they talk about this area here in Sebastopol being a high resource area, and therefore set up to bring a lot more density, a lot more population into this area. And I don't understand what they mean by high resource.
That's related to income, education, other kinds of opportunity metrics, equality kind of wise. And again, I'm happy to talk with you. That's a whole nother subject, and it's not on our agenda today. So let's talk about that offline if you don't mind, Christine.
Yeah, I feel like just generally, I just wanted to know what that meant.
Yeah,
I don't need to go into detail.
That's basically kind of what it means.
Can I ask about section 2.040, the form-based district map seems to be missing. Has that been defined? It'd be good to know where these form-based districts exist.
It has been defined, and we can certainly bring it up and make sure you all have that. Yeah.
Are you ready for us?
Take it away, Tony.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Design Review Board and Design Guidelines Subcommittee members. Good to be with you this afternoon. Thank you, Carrie and John. Yeah, we're excited to be here in front of you. I've never seen the inside of the meeting hall here in Sebastopol. So yeah, thanks for having us. I just want to give a quick introduction, and then our colleague at Opticos Design, Singe Saliki, will present a few slides giving you an overview of the document in front of you. But I just want to give you an introduction to this. We've been writing form-based codes and zoning ordinance for probably over 20 years. And many of us at Opticos Design have experience working in the public sector as a planner, like John or Carrie. And so we have some sensitivity to what ordinances need to do for the public and for developers and for communities of staff and appointed officials like you. So we try to bring all that to the table when we write what we write. And so if you just keep in mind that sometimes something might seem a little exhaustive where you get it, you might say, why is it there's so much detail on something? it might be that somebody else doesn't quite get it the way you do, and from where they're coming from, they need that extra information, and vice versa. So there's a lot of content that has that mark. So anyway, there's always a balance. You know, we've worked with staff and worked with the design like subcommittee over a period now, and try to strike a good balance for Sebastopol, and try to find the standards that are most relevant to the kinds of things that you're concerned about or that you see. So that's another way to say we're always willing to learn and find out something that we can do better. So looking forward to your feedback and your comments. And with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Singe.
Thank you, Tony. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Let me just go to my presentation and I'll share my screen here.
Singe, if you'd like, if it would help you, I have the slides and I can share my screen. If that would help you.
Yes, please
Okay.
do.
I'll do that right now.
Okay.
Is that coming across?
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Hello, everyone. As Tony said, today I'll be presenting to you an overview of Sebastopol's objective design standards. Next slide. The topics that I'm going to cover today are going to discuss what are objective design standards, where the standards apply, how we prepared the standards, and then just an overview of the specific topics that are covered by the standards. Next slide. The California Government Code provides this definition for objective standards as standards that involve no personal or subjective judgment from a public official. And the reason why the state is requiring objective standards is to support more streamlined review and approval of housing projects. Next slide. So the intent of these standards for really look at the form of development in Sebastopol to try and understand how these standards could reflect development that was oriented to pedestrians in both its form and scale. The standards really focus on producing housing types that are appropriate to the different contexts in the city. So, for example, housing types that are appropriate for downtown might not necessarily be the same types that are appropriate for Healdsburg Avenue or South Main Street. Also, the standards really try to produce buildings that fit in with the existing development and are reflected in the form, character, and scale of what will be produced by the standards themselves. Next slide. So the odds will apply citywide to all commercial and residential parcels that currently allow 2 or more units. This includes areas where duplexes are allowed, as well as multifamily zone districts and mixed-use zone districts where residential is an allowed use. Next slide. Our approach to developing this is really form-based, where we use the existing and intended physical character as the inputs to develop the actual standards that you will find in the final document. First, we looked at the existing character in the neighborhoods throughout the city and identified prevalent patterns that we found. And we also looked at the existing development standards and what they actually produce to understand what is the intended physical character. And specifically, we looked at the zoning envelope that is allowed for each of the zones where the odds would apply. So that's R5 through R7 and the CO, CG, and CD zones. We compared the prevalent patterns to the intended physical character to see if they are in alignment and also to help inform the new odd standards. And our research was summarized in an existing conditions memo that we produced earlier on in the project. One key concept that we focus on is differentiating between house scale and block scale. And the downtown area is a block scale environment that's characterized by buildings that have 0 front and side yard setbacks, and the buildings really help to define the street. And this is in contrast to the adjacent neighborhoods, which are more of a house scale environment with increased front and side yard setbacks. And the reason why this is important is because we want to ensure that the odds fits across a spectrum of environments that will allow both house scale and block scale projects to occur.
Singe, can I just say something here? I just want to say to everyone there that if you notice, this is downtown Healdsburg, and we're not talking about downtown Healdsburg in any of these standards, but we found that in presenting this concept of house scale and block scale buildings, that this little snapshot of downtown Healdsburg is a really clean, simple way to explain it. We're happy to make a diagram like this for Sebastopol.
Thank you, Tony. Next slide. So our analysis resulted in the odds being organized into a palette of 4 districts, which intended to produce a spectrum of intensity from lower intensity house scale neighborhood environments, which are shown towards the left side of the slide, up to higher scale higher intensity block scale environments, which are shown towards the right side of the slide. And you can see some of the key metrics for the 4 different districts, the number of stories that are allowed and the overall height that is allowed in each of these districts. This is also reflected in the Objective Design Standards district map, which is shown here on this slide. And the more intense areas, which are located in downtown and a portion of the east side of Petaluma Avenue, are shown in purple on the map. And then less intense areas which are shown along the major corridors of Healdsburg Avenue, Highway 116, and Bodega. These are T4 neighborhood small areas. These areas also include what is called an open sub-district, and it's shown as a hatch over a portion of the T4 neighborhood areas. And the open sub-district is a tool that we use to allow more uses within the same form as the base district. The least intense of these districts is the T3 neighborhood edge, which is shown in yellow. And currently, this only applies to a small area that Tony just circled. It only applies to a small area in the city right now. However, in the future, it could be expanded to apply to more areas in the city. Next slide. So now I'm just going to give an overview of the specific standards that are going to be in what is called Article 2 and will be a new standalone document adopted by resolution. The document is organized into 11 chapters, and I'm going to go through and describe some of the key features as well as dive in more into specific chapters to provide more detail. Starting with the preamble, it describes the context and the Sebastopol transect and identifies the form-based districts that implement the Sebastopol transect. In chapter 1, it's just an introduction that specifies the basis and intent for the odds. And then chapter 2 establishes the palette of the 4 districts that are included in the odds. Chapter 3 provides specific standards that are specific to each of the districts. And chapter 4 provides standards that really guide the design of sites. Chapter 6 goes into, chapter 5 goes into standards, detailed standards to shape the zoning envelope through the use of specific building types. And then chapter 6, this is for standards for frontages, which is the transition area between the back of the sidewalk and the building facade. Chapter 7 is for architectural design standards and is style neutral. Chapter 8 provides standards for signage, and chapter 9 standards for large sites, which apply in situations where you have a very large parcel, and the threshold in this odds is a parcel that's at least 3 acres, where there's an expectation to subdivide it into new streets and blocks. Chapter 10 describes the administrative process for projects that are subject to the odds. And then chapter 11 is definitions and includes definitions that are specific to odds and really supplements what's existing in Title 17. Next slide. So I'm going to go into detail now about the specific contents of different chapters, starting with chapter 3. So as I previously mentioned, chapter 3 contains guidance for the basic zoning envelope for each of the 4 districts that are in the odds. And it's organized, as you see there on the slide, in 4 pages and includes the intent of the district and the basic dimensional standards that help to create the zoning envelope. And the standards are presented in tables, and they are keyed to the diagrams that are above the table. Next slide. Chapter 4 provides standards for specific topics that affect the design of the site. For example, screening and slope. And these example pages that are shown just include some tables that contain standards, but this chapter also has a lot of diagrams to illustrate some of the topics that are regulated in the chapter. Next slide. Chapter 5 goes into standards for specific building types, which is really a way to think about the outcome of the zoning envelope. And it's a way to ensure that the odds produces buildings which are compatible in form and scale with the surrounding context. And the building types are organized by zone, by district, and range from house scale types, which are duplexes and triplexes, to block scale building types such as Main Street buildings and larger courtyard buildings. The standards regulate the building footprint and also provide guidance for how the footprint can be expanded using wings. Next slide. Chapter 6 addresses frontages and provides specific guidance for this area, which is a transition between the back of the sidewalk and the building facade. And again, the standards are organized in a spectrum to ensure that you have a consistent public realm, and because this impacts the pedestrian experience as you move along that public realm. The frontage types are organized by districts and range from more residential frontage types, which are allowed in less intense residential districts, T3 and T4 neighborhoods to be specific, to more commercial frontages like storefronts, which are allowed in more intense mixed use and commercial environments. Next slide. The architectural standards in Chapter 7 are style neutral and address architectural variety, building volume, facade composition, and materials, and really look at the basic elements that one should consider when you start to assemble a building. Next slide. The chapter also includes specific standards for architectural elements like roofs and doors and windows. And I know if you look at this page, these diagrams look very detailed. However, the specific standards call out, the diagrams only call out a specific element that is regulated. So for example, if you look at the example of the door, which is shown in the lower right-hand corner of the slide, the only element that's being regulated is the surround of the door. Next slide. Next slide. The next chapter addresses signage types and is again organized by districts. And generally, the signage types in the odds are only allowed in the open sub-district, which is along the major corridors, or in more intense Main Street environments like the downtown and portions of Petaluma and South Main Street. Next slide. Chapter 9 regulates large sites and really provides guidance for the process of subdividing larger parcels that are at least 3 acres. It includes guidance for the layout of streets and blocks to ensure connectivity with the surrounding areas, and also includes guidance for public access to these larger parcels through the use of specific open space types. And the standards for the open space types really help to shape the form and character for each of the open space types. Next slide. Chapter 10 provides guidance for the administrative process and review of odds projects, and it includes provisions for adjustments. Now, adjustments are really a tool that to help support the streamlined review of projects where there might be a condition that's unique to the project where an administrative relief is desired. And so this chapter tries to describe situations where adjustments might be acceptable, and it also provides guidance to the planner who is reviewing a project under odds on how to measure and understand how the adjustments can occur, so that it allows for a deviation from the dimensional standard that can be processed administratively as part of the application. The last chapter contains definitions that supplement those in Title 17. It also includes a section on measurement methods, which helps to explain how to calculate certain standards. For example, the percentage of sloped area on a parcel that can be developed, or the amount of a building facade where the frontage is required to be located. This concludes my overview of the odds, and with that, I'll hand it back to Tony if he has anything else to add.
No, thank you, Singe. Thank you very much for that presentation. We're ready for your questions and comments and feedback. Thank you, Singe.
All right, thank you, Tony and Singe. So I guess we just sort of open time to ask questions of the consultant. Does anybody have any questions of our group here?
I'll ask a question.
Okay.
Can you define precisely what walkable is?
Yeah, I think we have correct me if I'm wrong. Do we have a do we have a definition in this chapter about walkable, Singe? If we do, we could just read that. If not, I can tell you.
I think that it's not very precise. I did read it.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah, it just
So-
says it's compact, it's walkable, it's transit ready. That's somewhat vague to me because compact is Sebastopol compact, or is all of Sebastopol compact? Is downtown Sebastopol compact?
Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah, so yeah, we can work on that definition with you all. But generally what's intended by the term walkable is that because of the proximity, usually about a quarter mile, it depends on the city, it depends on the topography of the city. Sebastopol is generally relatively flat compared to cities with a lot of topography where walking is really strenuous and difficult, and walking time is shorter, or you wouldn't walk as far. But the term walkable is intended to describe a physical environment where, because of the proximity of something within a reasonable walking distance, say 5 minutes, it could be 10 minutes, depending on what you're walking to. We tend to use 5. Because of the proximity of those things within about 5 minutes of an area, then you can draw a circle around that and say, it can be argued that some, not all, people will use the opportunity to walk instead of driving their car for that thing that's 5 minutes away. Again, not everybody will do that, but the case can be made that some people will do that. And so that kind of environment with that proximity to something to walk to is called walkable. The opposite is called auto-dependent, or you might have heard the term drivable. That's another way it's described if you read in certain literature. And what that is referring to is the exact opposite. We're saying nothing's really within walking distance, and if it is, it's not worth walking along that, really sun-baked corridor without any trees to walk half a mile to get to what you're going to get to. And so instead, people take their car. So those auto-dependent contexts are the opposite of the walkable.
So how is the walkable achieved in the ODS?
Walkable already exists in many cases for Sebastopol. We're simply reinforcing it through the way that the development on each parcel is being proposed, as opposed to, like, say, the large site standard is a great example. Instead of if you want to produce more auto-dependent development instead of walkable, the large site standards could say, well, instead of making blocks that have this many buildings per block and these different building types, we're not going to require it. We're going to let you subdivide it in a very low intensity way and let you not have a interconnected grid of blocks and streets that would give people multiple choices to get to different places. We're going to let you do the opposite of that. So the standards work to make what is already a walkable town. Most of Sebastopol is already walkable. It serves to reinforce that, and it serves to make it when you divide large, say, big sites, like say a shopping center transforms into a neighborhood, it would make it a walkable pattern as opposed to an auto-dependent pattern.
So for example, like a neighborhood with meandering streets would not be walkable, but a neighborhood with...
No, sorry. The meandering street or rectilinear street has not much to do with walkable. It's if that meandering street was going up a 10-15% slope street, well, then that might limit the extent of how far you'd walk, but it wouldn't change that it's walkable in other areas. The meandering or rectilinear is not a factor in walkable. It's the proximity, it's the walkable distance to things that are nearby. So again, if I'm going to use the example of a restaurant, if there's a restaurant on the highway, on Highway 116, and there's a neighborhood east and west of there, right? And about 5 minutes, or let's say 1,500 feet, either way of that restaurant on Highway 116, it's somebody can make the argument that it's reasonable to expect some people would walk to that restaurant rather than drive. The walkable, the auto-dependent opposite of that is that somebody might say, yeah, it's 5 minutes away if you walk, but man, you ever walked on that street? That street is dangerous. There isn't any shade. It's not any fun to walk on it. So it might be within distance, but right now in that situation, it would be an auto-dependent state. And so you'd need to transform it to walkable. So some of the standards in this set of objective standards aim to fix those kinds of things when the opportunity arises.
So having a nice sidewalk would be walkable.
That's one factor. Again, you have to, the basic thing in walkability is not just the fact that somebody could walk, it's that there's something to walk to within short walking distance of a certain place. And so the way to do that is you can take take the main corridor through Sebastopol, through downtown and north and south of that, and ask yourself, at these particular locations, is it reasonable to expect that somebody would walk 5 minutes, either from the west or the east, to that location on Highway 116?
I see.
So, and there are a lot of different ways that people look at this, but, say a quarter mile for if you were to walk to a store or walk downtown to a restaurant or to a restaurant along 116 or Pleasant Hill, people will walk a little bit further if it's a commute to get to work, especially if parking is tight and it's, I know some of you live and work in the same area. You tend to walk for a little bit further if it's sort of for work where you're going to be there for a long time, as opposed to if you're getting groceries and you're going to be carrying bags of grocery home. And obviously that depends upon your physical ability as well. But yes, do you have sidewalks? Are those sidewalks shaded, especially on a day like today? Are you going to take your car? Or are you going to walk? There's a lot of different factors that go into all of this, the topography, and those types of things. For schools, the city does have a safe route to school program to make sure there's safe sidewalks or pathways to school, and those types of things. So those all factor into that walkability.
I would just make this statement that walkable is just flung around left and right.
Yeah.
In all of this. And it seems to me that it's very subjective what that means. Like I'm not any clearer really now than I was when I started this conversation with you. So.
It's something that it's just, you don't need to be, the standards aren't dependent on the definition of walkable being absolutely scientifically precise, but they could be. If you said, what some cities do is they produce a map that says we're going to determine that these areas, because of these factors, today in 2023, according to these factors, shade, walkability, shade, topography, access, proximity, they are walkable according to those characteristics. And by the same token or definition, these other areas are not. And so a great thing for that is that your cities use that in their comp plan, their general plan, and they say, we just learned that some of our areas are auto-dependent that we thought were walkable, and we'd like them to be walkable. Let's work to make them more walkable. By the same token, those same communities say, our policy direction for some of the areas that are auto-dependent is going to remain that they say auto-dependent because our community expects on those areas to stay auto-dependent. That's a choice. Once you have these a lens that could tell you these things, you can make those choices from a policy level in your comp plan and your general plan, and then implement that through zoning. Here with the objective standards, we don't have that tool to look at in Sebastopol, so we are using our understanding of what walkable development needs and applying that. But we'd be happy to look at that with staff and develop. We can't do it exhaustively. That's not part of what we're hired to do here, but we're very experienced at that. We could produce a diagram that would show you and point out the characteristics for you.
All right. Thank you, Tony. Do you have any further questions for the consultants? Anybody?
General for this team.
What's that?
More general.
More general.
Questions to be discussed.
Okay, so I guess then we should open it up to the public, because I think we have somebody at least on Zoom. Questions from the public for our presenter today?
So if you do have a question or comment, Callum, I see that you have your hand raised. Can you go ahead and unmute yourself? And you have 3 minutes.
Hello, everyone. My name is Callum Weeks. I'm the Policy Director of Generation Housing. I don't actually really have any sort of critiques whatsoever. I just want to take the opportunity to thank staff and the consultants for all their hard work and for bringing this together. It's a pretty challenging document to get through, as some of you might have noticed in the process of looking at this. So I also appreciate you guys dedicating time to it. So with that, thanks again, and look forward to meeting you guys in the community soon.
All right, thank you, Callum. And that's the only member of the public. Is that right?
That is correct. And I don't believe we received any email comments or phone, any other communications prior to the meeting.
All right, great. Okay, thank you. So, go
Can
ahead,
I just,
Tony.
Yeah, can I offer something in response to one of the comments that Callum Weeks just made? I just wanted to offer a perspective on the fact that this document is, a couple hundred pages, and as Callum said, it takes some work to get through it. I just want to offer this perspective of some work we're doing for the ABAG region. ABAG asked us to help them with some objective standards for the region, to provide some basic provisions and content for cities that need it early next year. And one of our tasks was to examine other objective standards in the region. And we looked across California. We looked at 15 examples. And the majority of those examples, I would say 12 of the 15, they took an approach where 2 of the examples were ours, and one was Lafayette. Lafayette was this little checklist, 2-page checklist. It was just like a couple sentences. So instead of all these graphics and content that you have here, Lafayette said, we have our downtown. Here are the 12 questions that we need somebody to answer, and you either answer yes or no, and that's our checklist of objective standards. But the other 12 ranged in their content, but they all had the same approach. They didn't break it down into a kit of parts like what this does. The objective standards that you have in front of you is so long, so lengthy, because it's made up of these chapters that are keyed to the zone, the districts, and that's why they're longer, because one chapter is referenced by the districts, and you use the information only as you need it. Another way to say that is nobody's ever going to read all 200 and something pages, because they go to their district, and that district tells them that based on their selection of in the menu of building types or frontage types or signage types, whatever else, what content they need to go to, and that's it. Those other 12 examples that we reviewed for ABAG did the opposite of that. They didn't organize their content that way. So you as a reader had to read, in some cases, I think the longest one was 108 pages or something like that. You had to read all 108 to know what applied to your project. So I've never done a comparison to see if using these objective standards, it results in more than 108 pages, but I'd be willing to wager that this approach requires less pages than the other. It just doesn't look like it because it's thicker, because it's trying to cover everything that you'd ever need. But the test is to look at the district that you select, for example, the T4 neighborhood, small district, and then go and make your selections and then add up the pages there. And I'd be willing to say that they're going to be even less than 50. So anyway, just perspective to keep in mind.
Quick question. These other examples that you're referring to, were those also form-based code?
Most of them were, yeah. Some of them were not. So, like Hayward did one for their corridors, and it was not. I couldn't tell what kind it was. It wasn't an outright form-based code. There were, of those 12, that I would say probably 2 were not form-based codes, and the other 10 were. Yeah.
Thanks for that, Tony.
And so I know Melissa, Vice Chair Henley had a question about the map. Would you like us to share the map to go over that a little bit more in detail as you're kind of looking at it?
It would be helpful to have that on the screen.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen to do that. And so as you're going through it, and I kind of translate it to the zoning a little bit because most of us are familiar with the zoning, some of the zoning districts. So the T3 neighborhood edge, that is the R5 zone. And you can actually see, so the R5 allows single family and duplex.
Is that the yellow?
That's the yellow. We do not have very much property zone that. So you can see, I believe this is Stefanani Court, and over on Eleanor Avenue, there's a few. That's about it in town. However, that is kind of poised so that in the future, if we rezone additional properties R5, then this would be applicable to those. When we introduced the R5 zoning in 2018, and okay, I say we, this is kind of before my time, but my understanding, the map got adopted like 2 months after I started work here. The intent of the R5, what's mapped right now is locations that do have duplexes. So there was some, like the Stefanani Court is, I believe, a development where the end of the court has duplexes. That's the one kind of on the cul-de-sac over on the west side. South of on Robinson Road is the back portion of that. The intent is to kind of create a transition between single family and denser development, multifamily and whatnot. In 2017, 2018, or 2018, when the Planning Commission was reviewing the zoning map changes, there were additional parcels that were identified, some down on Hayden, some on Calder, and sort of, I think it was Calder, kind of right around the Art Center. The City Council did not adopt those. My understanding is that they were concerned that some of those lots would be potentially consolidated and large apartment building built. Like the stuff on Hayden is actually the traditional picker cottages, so they're very small lots. And that presents an opportunity for, you know, people coming into the housing market as first-time housing purchase, you know, homeowners with the smaller lots. And so, so the council did not adopt that at that time. There is a potential that, you know, just with the maximum lot size and things like that, that you could certainly go relook at doing that in the future. Looking at that is, and considering that is in our housing element over the next 8 years. So when you look at this R5, it, which is that T3, that's the really smaller scale development, as you saw from Singay's slide. That would be, you know, smaller heights and smaller densities because it is limited to duplexes, I believe, in our zoning ordinance. Development does need to be consistent with their zoning ordinance as well as these. There are many places in this book where like the density and things refer to the zoning ordinance. So that's kind of how they interact. So that's the T3. T4 is basically all of our R6 and R7. That's the multifamily zones, mainly along Bodega. and there's, so all of Bodega development that is most of the R7, R6, some to the west of downtown as well. So that includes West Street, Mary's Lane, not quite to Florence, but in that area, and Wilton. So, like for instance, this white thing right here is, I'll zoom in a little bit. So this white thing right here, that's City Hall and the library. So west of the downtown core. We have some of those R6, R7. So that's residential only areas. And then that also applies to areas that are like Murphy, Bately Court, south of Healdsburg, off of Murphy. There's multifamily there. And then some of the other development that's along Healdsburg, where it's and then it also includes the commercial developments other than downtown, for the most part. And that includes the kind of the open, which is a little bit different. And if we need to have Singe go over that again, we can do that. That's the stuff with the striped on it, where it's kind of larger commercial stuff like Redwood Marketplace and the commercial along Healdsburg and South Main down to Fircrest and thereabouts. Then the Main Street Small is kind of the stuff along Petaluma Avenue. And I think, so that's kind of the smaller scale commercial. And then the Main Street Medium is the downtown area, just to kind of give a general guide to that.
Okay, thanks for that. Any questions on that map for our staff?
Since the map is missing from the final guidelines, can these guidelines be amended to include the map?
Absolutely, yes, yes.
All right, well, I guess we can take some time to discuss this as a board. Anybody want to jump in first? Carrie Bush?
Sure. Boy, would I? Well, I've been looking forward to this for a long time. It's great. I wanted to say thanks, starting with a big thank you for everyone for their hard work, especially the subcommittee who put a lot of time and effort into putting a document like this together. I know it probably took a lot of your extra brain power and time to see this. I think, I'd like to just ask, if I could, the subcommittee to report out a little bit and to ask about their challenges. I was wondering about the examples, possible key points that summarize the final ODS this draft. If there were perhaps certain subjective notions that were then made objective. Were there possibly any of those key points that you care to tap on or two? And I'm primarily looking, I'm sorry, at Chair Langberg and also our board member level.
Because Paul Fritz isn't here.
That's correct.
Christine, would you like to take a stab?
Well, it's just you're part of this document, you're part of the subcommittee of the document. I'm just asking if there were any specific things that really targeted or found as a example or key point that targeted this sort of subjective or initial guideline to make it more effective. Does that make any sense? I did say summarize. The word summarize. The final one, yes. Draft, so.
I'm going to say that I felt, I reviewed the objective design standards because this is supposed to be, some nice document for Sebastopol specifically.
Christine, can you get your mic? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So I looked at some other examples. There's actually, I believe, 11 Opticos objective design standards in Marin, 10 cities in the Marin County. Is that correct, Tony?
We made it available to all 11. I think 6 of them were using it, and the other, 7 of them were using it, and the other 4, we're not sure what they're doing. They're doing other routes.
So I reviewed some of the ones that were adopted just to compare and see, and it's the same document basically. And so, I mean, you can take the page and take Belvedere and Corte Madera and Sebastopol and turn to a page and read the identical text. So I felt like what I was asked to do was kind of take a boilerplate ideology and then try to somehow make it specific to Sebastopol. And a lot of times that did not make sense to me. I'll give an example because we went over this in the committee. We had a parking standards. Now, of course, I can't get it. And we had some language in the parking standards, which I had some in-depth, as you recall, comments about. And Tony had said, well, we will strike this. And we've stricken it from many other documents. Well, I find it interesting to note that in the Belvedere document and in the Corte Madera document, this exact wording is identical in those two documents and a couple of the other. And then I go to our final draft here where I was told it would be stricken, and there it is. So I understand that this is coming from some sort of boilerplate, but I'm concerned when I see that one example right there that I feel, for me, if I'm going to, go along with this, I need to go back through and review and see what other examples we have of things that we were told were going to be changed in the document or customized to Sebastopol. Were they not? I have another copy of this document that's dog-eared and bled on. I read so much. All my notes are on it. But, between Thursday and today, I certainly do not have time to do that. I mean, this has already taken me hours and hours of my time. So this is a concern that I have on a big picture. One, it seems to be the same document everywhere. And two, it doesn't seem to have really been proofread by the consultant. Maybe that's the only example. Maybe there's 20 more examples. I don't know because I didn't look.
That helps answer my question. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's a 4-year process, right? If I did my math correct, you guys have been at 4 years.
Is that right?
Yeah, it's off and on, right?
Right.
But I mean,
No,
starting from
we've been at this
2019 to
for
23.
6 months.
Yeah, we started in probably January. So John and I started working with the consultant in November, and we started the DGS, the subcommittee meetings in early 2023.
I mean, because the thing is I think that this is a fundamental change. This is changing to form-based code, and it's a fundamental, massive change, really. And I could go into it because I've thought about this very much in depth. And I feel like, for me, I'm a working professional person with a very busy schedule, and I don't feel like I have yet at this point in time committed the time. Just finding that one thing, I opened it up and found one thing. I feel like I need more time to proofread and check and consider, because I don't even see how you even get to understanding this without understanding the final regional housing needs allocation plan. And that's a whole nother document. You get into the RENA numbers and why they're designated and who's designating them and their methodology. And that noodles its way all the way back to the American Community Survey, which is the basis data for all of this. And that is 100% self-reporting. So data from the basic point is skeptical. So I think that's why I was trying to ask the question about how do we have other SB 35 projects? Can they come in? Can we take more time to do this? To review this, to consider this, to think about these things. I suspect I probably know some things from here that you guys don't know about. I'd be happy to share, but it's vital to understanding this, what's in here. So, I've asked, and all along I've asked more time. We need more time to consider this. I feel personally that this is kind of getting shoved down our throats. I don't think that there's any intention to do anything sneaky. But I just feel that way.
Thanks for that, Christine. I think to respond to, I mean, the one comment of your finding of the proofreading would be a concern to me, because I certainly am not looking back at what we did and what we talked about and double checking if it's in this final draft. That seems like it's the job of our staff. So if, we can ask them if they feel like it's been gone through with every comment that we came up with and wanted to change. Has it been changed? Could you guys comment on that?
Sure. So we did have sort of an electronic interactive process with Opticos. It sounds like we might need to go back through that and have a meeting with Opticos to make sure we picked up all of the comments. But every time, so all of our comments were tracked. Those on the subcommittee know from either the offline meetings that staff and the committee had and put onto the PDF, or through the meetings themselves. But I think we can certainly meet with Opticos to go through and make sure that those, and we did record all of those meetings. So we have those in terms of, being able to double check all of those. I know the electronic stuff, yes, they have certainly incorporated in, and they noted wherever they were incorporating and how they were incorporating things. We had a couple of follow-up meetings, or John did, with them as well to answer questions. Did everyone do 100% correct? Sounds like probably not, but I think if you'd like, you can use this meeting, not adopt the resolution, but provide any direction, any specifics where you feel like something might need to be changed, or if it's just going through and making sure that all of the various edits that were done, we can, if you, you can either adopt the resolution with that direction, and we will do that prior to it going to Planning Commission and City Council. City Council is adoption, and that's not until September is when that's scheduled. We're bringing this to the Planning Commission in August. So we do have some time to go back through and make sure those comments are incorporated in terms of sort of the more time to sit with the document.
Okay. Well, so there's that sort of more short-term schedule. And then to your comments earlier about the arena numbers and all that, we could do this next year. Oh, right. If it pushes out a couple months, it's not necessarily.
Yeah, I would not recommend. So there's a couple things on that one. We are using grant funding for this, and we do need to adopt prior to the end of this year. So we do have some time, but we don't have kick it 3 years down the road.
Or next year,
or
to
next
my
year.
comment.
Right, or next year.
So actually
yes.
it is, the goal is to adopt these this year.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. So we do have additional time. We can certainly, like I said, Planning Commission is scheduled in August, so we can certainly continue this item and you don't need to go before the Planning Commission for any reason. It's just when it worked on your schedule. So we can continue it to August, and so that you all have a little bit more time now that you've had this meeting to provide the context and kind of the general outline from Opticos, as well as the intent of what we're doing with this and why this is, of course, the follow-on from the existing conditions and the legislative presentation that we did earlier. But yes, if you'd like more time, we can certainly do that. We wouldn't lose schedule by continuing it to August at all. If we continued further than that, then we would be need to bump City Council forward. But again, we'd have a little bit of time for that.
Okay.
And of course, now that everyone's head from the subcommittee has been in this for months, if you bump stuff 6-12 months down the road, people end up forgetting what the heck they were saying anyway.
I don't think that's what we're saying, but it seems to me from this discussion so far, there's a fine-grained solution of making sure the document reflects all the work of the subcommittee. That's 2/6 of this board, so I'd like to hear what the other 4/6 have to say, and whether that may prove to be all we have to do is check the edits and we're good, or maybe there's a lot more to look at. So So on that, I'd like to open it up again. So Carrie, I think do you want to keep going? And
Yeah, sure. I mean, I want to provide some feedback. So my overall feedback, at Design Review Board, I recognize design as a process, and my nature of that initial question was to sort of understand a bit the process, right? That's the overarching intent for that question. So overall, I mean, I'm again excited to see a form-based code. I'm looking at this document for the first time, that I know has been worked on for quite some time by an awful lot of folks, but the overarching feedback that I have to give is that it's a really wonderful document, rich with a lot of detail, that is providing an awful lot of guidance that, again, to me, in what I've had to see come before the board, is to eliminate subjective items. And this does that. So that's my comment, overarching comment. Hopefully that's helpful and something maybe to piggyback on from more of the conversation.
thank you for that. And I just want to add to that, just from my perspective, being on the committee, I think it's not a unique document in the world, right? To your point, Christina, yes, it's you see this in other cities and even in other work of Opticos, but we did, with this map, right? We went over the zoning, we went over literally specific parcels. Should it be this type or this type in the odds? So I feel like we did our best to tailor it, a very detailed document to our town as well. So just to add that. Melissa, would you like to go next or go down the line?
Sure, thank you. I'll echo Carrie's feedback and appreciation for everybody who's been involved in this. I really appreciate it. It's a tremendous piece of work. I've used a lot of form-based code in my work, both in California, outside of California, and even internationally. So this is not a new concept to me. I'll say this document is not particularly user-friendly, and I'd like to make some recommendations to allow it to be so. First, I'd like to see that the administrative section be moved to the front end of the document. I think instructions on how to do this process, where this process is applicable, how it's applicable, how to implement it as a project should be up front. We shouldn't get to the end of the document and be like, oh, this is how I do all of this work that I've just had described to me in depth. So I'd like to see that. I love the clarity and definitions. I think we need a few more in here. I think compatible is a word that's used a lot and is not defined and should be. It's one of those things. I like your point, Tony, that we might all think we know what we're talking about, but that's a pretty critical word, and I think we should have that defined. I would really like some additional work done on bringing modernity into this, or accepting modernity in design. There are references to being compatible with existing historic buildings, established neighborhoods. I understand in keeping with the character of our town, but if we were working to the letter of this law, then we wouldn't have been able to approve the Habitat project that we just approved. And that it is not in keeping, it is too modern for what this is recommending. And I think that comes in the architectural standards, like there's no zero eve allowed if we were to read these standards. So things that have that kind of minimal modernity to them, needing to have frames and surrounds and trim and clapboard and various other bits and bobs. Like, it'd be great to see something that recognizes that cleanliness and design is not a crime. It'd be great to see these reference images actually marry up with our town. It's great to hear that this is a carbon copy of what a lot of other jurisdictions are using. I think that's an unfortunate aspect of this document. Seeing photos of Target is not really a helpful reference. Seeing photos of Safeway might be a helpful reference. Seeing photos of the Redwood Market might be a helpful reference, but we want to make this really accessible for folks who are coming to town and want to do projects, and it should be as easy to understand and as legible to the local context as possible. And I don't think we've done that here. I I had some questions as well about the walkable context. I think this is a nice explanation. It'd be great if we could give some other references, maybe to like 20-minute cities, or maybe there's some work of Jan Gale or something that we can provide some additional context to folks, again, coming in trying to do projects. There's a phrase, and I'll also zoom out a little bit. Most of my concerns around this are that City Council in 2 years' time will be like, fantastic, let's just greenlight this for all projects in town, and it won't just be for SB 35. And all of a sudden, we have this really prescriptive set of guidelines for projects, all projects. So I think it's really important that we be careful about the precedent that we're setting with this document. I think for SB 35, fantastic, great, let's keep it narrow. But if this potentially could go far and wide, like that could be really dangerous. There's a phrase about the Form-Based Code Institute on page 4. It says, form-based codes foster predictable built results. And that feels very un-Sebastopolian to me. That is not what Sebastopol is about. We're about creativity. We're about the weird and the wonderful. We're about encouraging a plurality of ideas and design and representation. And I am concerned about predictable built results. I realize I'm ranting a little bit. I would also like to request a sample would be page 13, site standards. Page 13B, site standards, subsection 1, screening, subsection B, improvements to existing development. I'd like to add the phrase that are subject to AHJ approval or something similar. There are a lot of references to improvements to existing developments, improvements to existing facades, improvements to existing whatever. I think this document will give government overreach into directing paint colors or things that would otherwise not require a permit. And so it should only be for things that would be subject to approval anyway. Otherwise, if things are not subject to approval, then hands off. So if we can add some language that would do that, that would be great.
And Melissa, could you repeat the phrase that you actually?
Sure. My recommendation, Larry should probably look at this recommendation. Yeah. That are subject to AHJ approval or authority having jurisdictions approval. And that would be for any time that there's a reference to improving an existing development site, facade, et cetera. That happens in a lot of different places.
Would it be acceptable to put that in the administration section as an overall? Otherwise, my concern is it's better to put that in one place.
Yeah,
And otherwise, how many times are you going to miss that?
totally. Well, hopefully they don't miss any times because they're getting all of these updates right throughout the whole document. I think that's probably fine as long as it's not subject to administrative approval. We don't want to add like another level of somebody having to like submit something, even though they were never required to submit something in the first place.
Right.
I had a question about on page 14, building type standards. So it's C. 14C subsection 1, there's a exception for public safety buildings. Should these just be the ESSBs or is it all public safety buildings? I think that probably needs some like further refinement. Page 14, C subsection 1.
The acronym you referred
Oh,
to?
ESSB is the Essential Services Building. Yeah.
Which in
Usually, like,
Sebastopol is our police station. So
station,
it is
yeah.
kind of the same. It does, but I believe the fire station would be
It would be
considered a
as
public
well.
safety building
And
as
sometimes
well.
City Hall, sometimes is classified as ESSB. It kind of depends, but it'd be worth noting that. And then on that same page, F, architectural design standards, subsection 2, the building facade renovations that propose to change any of the following: wall finishes, window trim finishes, roof materials, et cetera, goes on. Several of these things are not permittable events, so things that would require permits. And so I think we need, again, to remove anything that doesn't already trigger a permit. I mentioned earlier, page 18, 2.040, the map is missing. There are some layout issues just for the team to look at on page 23. Is this reducing, like on page 30, the building height, the 30-foot max overall for the building form? Is this reducing from 32? I didn't have time to go look at the zoning just to see if we're actually substantially changing the envelope on that type.
Sorry, so this is actually, so what I said before about this being consistent with our zoning, you actually just kind of reminded me. So in our residential zones, we basically allow a height of 30 feet and 2 stories in any zone. In our housing element, so you'll see that is actually, it is, the 30 feet is the same for it's basically our R5, which is a single family duplex, that transition zone I talked about earlier. In our R6 and R7, one of the state's comments for us was to allow 35 feet instead of 30 feet. We already allow 35 feet and 3 stories for affordable housing. And so, why would it be different for one housing versus another? The reason that Sebastopol did that was to try to encourage affordable housing and make it a little bit easier for everything to pencil out. But in our adopted housing element, we did change that. Planning Commission and Council are aware of that. That says that we would be changing our height for the R6, R7, that's the higher density multifamily, to 35 feet. So that's actually the one. So what you're seeing in here is consistent with the 30 feet of our current zoning. It isn't 32, it's 30, except that it's showing 35 for those areas that are the higher density multifamily.
Sweet.
So
cool. And then actually I had a question for Carrie on page 48, landscaping, screening height. Should this, it excludes trees on the heights. Should we expand this to bushes and shrubs?
Where are you at?
Right here, so.
Exclude trees.
Yeah, so like landscaping is a 3.5 foot max, and that excludes trees. And I've got some pretty aggressive grasses and various other things growing in my yard that's not a tree. Should we expand that to also include bushes and shrubs, or some other reference that would give a little more flexibility to height? And
Yeah. I mean,
So for Opticos, so this is page 48,
yeah.
2A, the chart on maximum screening height. I have gotten a note that they're having a little problems hearing. It's a little muffled. So if you could speak clearly. And
We heard the comment. Thank you.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, you're talking about, the footnote says excludes trees, and we could certainly exclude it. We're not, I don't know where we say it, but the intent is to not regulate bushes and shrubs either. So we can take them out. We can be explicit and say excludes trees, bushes, and shrubs.
great.
So would that then just be eliminating landscaping? Because what else is I mean, you already have fences and walls.
Yeah.
What else would landscaping be? So I think, Tony, we would, trees and shrubs, planting
Okay.
materials.
Yeah.
So I think just, Tony, taking out landscaping on that chart for all of those.
But what if you have a hedge that's 8 feet high on your front yard? I mean, it's trying to prohibit that, right? Yeah.
So so this is actually per our zoning ordinance. We do have the front yard fence or other screening, which includes hedges, is supposed to be 3.5 feet max. I think if you recall the design tour that we had, the first part, we were walking on Florence, and there were definitely some places where they were. I think I kind of recall bringing it up, but I don't remember where we landed on it as a kind of acceptable in some places, not in others. Again, this is just for SB 35 projects. Would you want them to have an 8-foot hedge at the street? It's again fine on the side and rear is 8 feet, but the front, I think, and I guess here's where I don't consider an individual plant to be screening, but if you have them all lined up and dense enough, pittosporum or whatever, where it's a solid mass, then it's a screening.
Right.
So.
There's a bit of a
But this is where I look to the DRB for guidance on this stuff.
Yeah, there's a bit of the rabbit hole on that one. But
Totally.
yeah, I remember well, based on our tour, I just remember there being a hierarchy in street type. And so how this applies to a specific project, is where I think this falls into that category. Having a certain vision triangle and not even having anything go above 2 feet, for example, conforms to probably local guidance, maybe not so, maybe the administrative guidance from instead of a design guideline. So that's where I'm a little bit confused.
Yeah, we
by
do
the
have
rabbit hole
city
here.
engineer who looks at
Right.
at corners and things like
Right.
that.
Yeah.
We're a little bit more lax than other communities, so I think we do allow the 3.5 feet
Okay.
up to a corner.
Yeah. Depending on any type of street hierarchy. Major corridors versus.
We do actually
minor
not.
streets.
We don't have that much detail in our standards at this point.
So do you feel happy with it as listed then?
When I read it, yeah.
Okay.
I was.
Then I'll retract my comment.
Well, yeah.
Oh, and then going next page, 49, mechanical equipment screening. By the way, I only spent 5 hours on this and I got 2/3 through. So that tells you where we're at. Subsection B1B, the roof mounted equipment screening, that it shall be surrounded by an opaque screen. If you just kind of Google mechanical screens, modern mechanical screens, I'm going to use a dirty word for this, modern mechanical screens. There's a lot of great options for semi-opaque. So I'm hoping that we could reduce this to no less than like 80% opacity.
So you think about like a proof panel,
Exactly.
kind of a thing.
Exactly right.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. It's and 80% is.
That's
I mean,
pretty
I'm not-
opaque.
That's pretty opaque. Yeah.
Yeah.
If you're looking up at an oblique angle, which you would be for a mechanical roof screen.
Totally. Yeah. I think, I would push for like 70 if we really want to go crazy. But also, you start to limit yourself by like how close that can be to the units, because a lot of them need, ventilation around. And so if you can do some perf, then we can actually keep it a little tighter to the unit. So I think that's to our benefit. And then I would remove the second half of the sentence, same page. So 2, wall and ground mounted equipment, subsection D, screening shall be architecturally compatible and include matching paint, finish, and trim cap of the building. I would just stop at architecturally compatible. Otherwise, I think we're getting a little too prescriptive there. And then page 50, the required lighting, there's no reference to dark sky standards. And Carrie, I wondered if, I know this is one of your hot button things. So are you happy with
And
this?
John too, because now he's doing some code compliance issues with a certain project.
Shall remain nameless. And I just want to make sure you were happy with all of that, and that you felt like it complied with our.
Yes, I did review those.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
Yep.
Same page, 4, allowable landscaping materials, subsection A, subsection 1, subsection C. It says that we can only have decorative, non-living landscaping materials are limited to 25%. What about like xeriscaping or xeriscaping? How does this help us with folks that want to go completely drought-friendly design?
Well, this is referring to, you mean to have no hardscape. Somebody wants to have no hardscape. That's what that, I think this is,
Well, sandstone, gravel, wood, and water. So, I mean, if you wanted to do a rock garden,
So your rock garden could be, so this does not include any walkways or driveways. So this is just the open landscaping areas. So you would be limited to 25% of your landscaping area for a, and we actually just talked about this for the SB9 standards the other day too, as we were reviewing those. So you would be limited to 25% of that to be sort of sand or rock so that we don't get like gravel yards throughout. But if you have gravel yard with planting in them, is that gravel then, or is it, is that small pea gravel or sand part of the, like the same as mulch, as opposed to just a barren rock? And I think that's probably something that would be a good discussion for this group to, so that we can clarify that in both this and the SB9 standards. Right. And so that the comment for up the coast was that also includes artificial turf. I think if we do allow artificial turf, you want to make sure that it's non-toxic, but other than that, it's, yeah. And this is where the design review board does a great job on individual projects. Can you pause the recording for a moment?
Recording stopped.
I don't know. It should be pretty easy to get out because there's an exit right there. Let's just let our tech person check it. Should we? What's that? No, just leave it us. Cody. Yeah, if you could, that'd be great. If we start seeing or smelling something, we'll leave out the back door. So, Chair Langberg, do you want to call like a 5-minute recess while we figure this out?
a 5-minute recess.
Thank you. Yeah, it's way too cold to be to have a fire, right? Well, it could be the air conditioning is burned out or something because it's, yeah. Just take a walk outside anyway, just to get away from the sound. Okay, so I still have the meeting, so if you want to just restart, I can start the recording again. Since when you disappeared, it came back to me as the host. Okay, so thank you all for your patience. We did have to get the fire department out here to clear the building. It was a false alarm. And we'll go ahead and feel free to resume.
Okay, thank you, Carrie. So,
Recording in progress.
we will now resume the meeting. We were listening to Melissa and her comments. Please carry on.
Pontification. Okay. I think Carrie was recommending that we chat as a crew about the 25% limit on decorative non-living landscaping materials. And Carrie Bush, I might look to you for some recommendations on that front. Go. Page 50.
Yeah, I'm on
Oh,
50, 51. Yeah, I actually went through some of these items. I don't have any specific comments at this very, very moment.
Oh.
If that's fair.
Do you want us to note that for potential discussion after you go through your comments, Melissa?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
that'd be great. I'm almost done. And then, so page 51, D, subsection 3, subsection C, in articulation such as buttresses or pilasters, if over 50 feet in length. I think this is probably unnecessary articulation. I would request that we allow this to be a simple, if somebody does a really nice cast in place wall, like, can we keep it clean and simple? It's like, section E, same page. How are maintenance requirements enforced? They aren't. No.
So if we do, yes, they are very difficult to enforce. And we did discuss this as a committee, that it's not a bad thing to put in, even if it's not enforceable, to kind of encourage people to maintain their properties. But you're correct. It's unless it becomes like there's a failed retaining wall on 116 right now, then it becomes it's failing onto the public right of way. And so now it's an issue.
Right opposite Florence. Yeah, I know what you're talking
Yeah, exactly. And so, for the city, we will let people know, like we've let people know about buckling sidewalks from trees and let them know about some maintenance that's needed. Usually that's when it's adjacent to a public right of way. So if you had a retaining wall at the public right of way, that's kind of the area where we might notify them.
Okay.
And again, that's going to be more of a structural issue than a aesthetic, is the paint peeling or something like that. But hopefully we wouldn't have a whole lot of painted retaining walls.
Hope not. On page 52, parking and loading, large vehicle parking. I was just curious about the subsection 1, the trucks, tractors, trailers, etc. Some of the lots that we've looked at are CO that would allow for a certain amount of, businesses that might have large trucks. I don't actually know how big a 1.5 ton load truck is.
Yeah, in fact, this is actually the example of the comment where we asked this to be stricken.
Okay.
And this is actually Christine's comment about
Oh.
this wasn't taken out. And so that's, yes. We did note that, a lot of the Woodmark, if it's farm worker housing, they're going to have larger trucks, or if people are, plumbers or tradespeople, they're going to have larger trucks.
Yeah.
So
Okay,
yes,
great.
the committee did strike this. So we just need to make sure these comments are picked up.
What about subsection D, the storage of unregistered or inoperable motor vehicles? As much as I would love for this to be law, how do you?
That is actually allowable.
Oh,
So yes, we are going to include that.
sweet.
And the cargo freight container, that's actually in our municipal code that we don't allow that anyway. So it's just reiterating that.
Okay, fantastic. I don't want to get into that. I don't want to get into What does top to toe mean? Page 59, section 4, grading and or regrading of design sites, subsection G. Is this a known thing?
That would be my
Slope?
guess. It should say that.
Okay.
Bank is generally.
Top of bank to toe of slope.
Got
Okay. And then just for the Opticos team, you have a second period after the sentence in section 5, subsection A, last sentence of that section. Gotcha. Of course, I'm joking. And then I think something to discuss as a team here would be page 60, massing, subsection B, and those subsections, changing in materials, changing in, anyway, there's some design things there that feel pretty prescriptive, and that might be appropriate, but again, I worry about the precedent that is setting.
We just talked about that in the SB 9 standards too, I think. I know this is the same, but I don't remember how we dealt with it.
Melissa, if I can.
Yeah.
I was looking.
Can you put on your mic there?
These mics. Not used to these things. Sorry. So we were looking, since we're on this chapter, page 57, the number of parking spaces, percent of gross parking area required to be landscaped. Again, this is a comment, but for 51 and over, the idea of a 5-foot minimum wide planter between every 5 spaces. I mean, there's such a contingency on parking, especially for larger areas. But I was wondering if we made that instead of a 5-foot minimum wide planter, a 10-foot wide minimum planter to create a greater overstory canopy. So again, these are
So this would be a larger planting, a 10-foot for every 5 spaces.
yes, or some modification to say maybe every 6 spaces or 7 spaces. You're still looking for parking requirements. Hard to make those in that bigger area.
Right. Yeah.
But what we're looking for is a much bigger area to contain a larger scale tree, right? So that
Got
provides
it.
much
Right.
larger
So you don't
scale.
get something like the Redwood Marketplace where all the trees have basically died out for whatever reason.
Exactly.
They're
Yeah.
not nearly enough to cover the 60-foot bay of a double loaded parking bay.
Precisely.
Got it.
I think that might be it. My only other comment would be that just in the samples, like neighborhood courtyard, I think that the images are perhaps a little redundant or similar. Like page 84, the middle image is very similar to the top image, and that kind of comment happens in a lot of places where we're showing a lot of very similar samples, and I think we again want to show a variety of samples so as to not be prescriptive. Page 87 has 2 photos from the same project. I might direct the Opticos team to Keller Court Commons as a really nice example in Petaluma of a pocket neighborhood project that could be a good one to look at. Got it. Okay.
I hear you. You get it. It's not working.
And then on page 97, looking at pedestrian access for Main Street building types, there's a recommendation for upper floor units to be accessed by a common entry along the front street. And I wonder if there's room to add if a public use is provided on the second story. Because if it's residential on the second story, then perhaps a side street access is actually more appropriate for residential functions rather than a front street access.
And sorry, can you repeat the page? I think I
Sure,
was just
yeah.
getting to the page when you started talking and I haven't found the section.
97 section, page 97, pedestrian access, comment C.
Mhm.
So,
I think all the rest of my comments are really around like the zero E's or sort of more modern building techniques that aren't specifically allowed or disallowed, but not called out. Okay. Then actually a question on page 131, corner parcels, there's a request for public or art or sculpture or fountains or something. Are these all in compliance with our open space standards as they currently are written, and then also public art requirements for projects of a certain size?
So we do, public art requirements do apply to commercial. They do not apply to residential only. A larger development like this would certainly hit that mark. So they could do it on site, and this is encouraging them to do that, obviously. And in terms of the other kind of open space, that is not required, but this was, again, looking at the sort of the very large sites.
Okay.
And so this is kind of the Redwood Marketplace kind of example. If you were to think, divide that into blocks or divided it, you know, the design sites is the
Yeah.
blocks, even if it's the same ownership.
Okay. I would just have a complaint about the corner elements outlined on page 132, that they're quite prescriptive and not very modern at all or clean. Again, I think we're getting a little too narrow in our interpretation here. Page 134, 7070, durability. I'm looking at section 1, subsection C for types of unpainted wood. I'd like the team to take another look at this about species that are environmentally and ethically sustainable. I probably shouldn't be putting Ipe and Brazilian walnut.
We did say that. I believe that was covered by the committee.
Yes, that was
This
actually.
is another example of stuff that
Yeah.
didn't get picked up, because we had stuff on that,
Yeah.
and we had stuff on the bird safety too.
Though black locust was added, I think, per my suggestion, so.
Yeah, we did
Maybe that was
modify
there.
this list. So Tony, I think we need to go regroup and go back through and make sure that you caught all the comments from the meetings. I know that it's pretty easy to track the comments that we had in the online version, but it looks like there's a number of comments from our meetings that did not get picked up.
And this is a personal bugaboo on page 138. Can we please show something that doesn't have a turret? Please.
Yeah, so this was just an example to show, I mean, we can probably get rid of the turret, but it's really just a guide to show what the elements are. Yeah.
But I'll comment on that because I think that's a lot of what Melissa's getting at. And
Right,
we
it's
got
all
at, we
very,
also
very
talked about
traditional.
in the committee, right? So if you have a developer who comes to town with not a very good design sense or care about that, they might look at these diagrams and pictures and just copy them. So it's really important that the diagrams and the photos are representative or have more variety from not just 100 years ago, but from now. I think we're hearing, it's not the first time we've been hearing this.
100% agree. All right, I'm gonna yield.
I just have a couple quick comments on Melissa. I just want to emphasize that I completely agree about the restrictions and not allowing any modern type buildings. It's really, this has been an issue I've had with this whole document, is it really restricts what kind of architecture that we can have. And that's troubling. And I cannot say strongly how much I agree with you on that. So, and then when we're getting back to the page 134, I now just pulled up my notes from when we had our prior meeting, and we did strike all of bird safety. I'm gonna have the notes, and then we took out the mahogany, the teak, the Brazil, we added the black locust, we added copper for 7.070 to B4, we added copper. So that, I think kind of that whole page got missed to my previous point.
Thank you, Christine. Let's move down to Marshall. Would you like to, any comments you'd like to make?
We didn't have a lot of time to review this, and I did the best I could. I made it through this the first time and felt that this was a huge positive step forward for the town, and this is fantastic to have. And I know we can pick it apart and so forth, but I personally did not have the time to go back through it with a critical eye. I just looked at it as a very positive thing with the time that I had. But it looks like we're going to go back through it, and I'm glad I can be a part of that. And something just came up here that is actually important to me. When I was, the 2 times I was being interviewed to be on the board, maybe I was wrong, but I got the gist that the people on the city council felt pretty positive about context and trying to give an eye towards the historic side of the community in terms of design. And so when I've been sitting in these meetings, we look at the quality of design, but I still am sensing that we want compatibility and so forth. So now that there's a conversation about more modern design, contemporary design, whatever you want to call it, it would be good for me to have somebody tell me what the real consensus is in this group, as well as the planning department. Where does everything lie on this? Should we be striving for more modern design or not? And that's just my own personal issue. So maybe somebody can talk to me about that.
I can speak to that. I think as a board, I think you will all agree that we've agreed that Sebastopol is eclectically non-conforming, and we don't really have any one standard or style, and that's Sebastopol.
Yeah, and maybe I can add to that kind of my own perspective, which is very style neutral. However, when I think about compatible, it isn't, oh, this is a Victorian, let's make it look like a Victorian. It's much more like how historical standards work, where you see a lot of, like especially in England, historic buildings that have a very modern addition to it, but it is compatible in the scale and the language and how it ties together. So to me, it's more about the design values of, however nebulous they might be, the walkability, the welcoming, the pedestrian oriented, the, not the, like the CVS where you get the huge patio that's just a blank concrete area, but how do you inhabit that? How do you embrace the public realm? How do you engage with that? How do you address the scale of your adjoining development? Because let's face it, if you look at a lot of Bodega Avenue, it's 1950s, 60s, 70s apartment buildings that, if those are historic, which technically I guess they are now because they're more than 50 years old, I don't think we would necessarily want to match those, correct? I'm saying not. So I'm not alone on that one. We want to do better than that, and we want to strive for better. So to me, it's not about a style, and that's what I like about Sebastopol as well. It is eclectic, and people do. I mean, I love the fact that we've got a purple building and a pink building, and those types of things in town. But it is about the rest of those contexts that aren't necessarily about the color choices or the style choices.
Good. I appreciate the clarity. Some towns try to force a certain look for the whole town, Yeah, right. But anyway, I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Marshall. Lynn, any comments?
Yeah. I'm real vague about a lot of the details and the ramifications of this document and what will happen if it is adopted. And I kind of feel like I want to hold back until I understand that better. There's so many things that seem subjective about what we're doing here. And it's to Carrie's point here, she was just talking about what compatibility means. Well, it seems to mean different things to different people. I wouldn't quite go along with Carrie's definition of compatible, what it means. You know, it's just, there's statements in there about working with the historic category of Sebastopol. Well, how you do that is not in here in any detail. It's subjective. And, you know, I think they've got the easy things objective, but not what kind of really counts. And that can be seen in many different ways about what makes a place likable, comfortable, and walkable. And so the other thing is, it seems this is supposed to be about residential, and it seems like most of the information that's presented here is in the commercial area. And so how does that seems off to me. And there's just a lot of little things in there that I wonder about. And it's like, you know, there's a lot on fencing, but there's nothing in there about where you can't put a fence. And yet there's the term walkable over and over again. And fences do a lot in our community even to make things less walkable. So I can't make a decision on this for myself and without further looking at it.
Sure, and maybe I can address a couple of those comments. This does apply to so the SB 35 legislation that this addresses. It does apply to the multifamily residential, but it does also apply to where you have commercial. I think you need 35% commercial and the rest can be residential. And then you would be, if you're subject to SB 35, you can go through that process. So it does also apply in our commercial zones. And so we did need to address both. And that's actually why they separated them into different zone, you know, the different districts, the very small scale, the higher density. So the sort of I'll call it the bodega corridor where we have the higher density multifamily. And those other areas, and then the two different kind of commercial areas, whether it's downtown versus not downtown, just for simplicity. There's some nuances there and there, how they do that. But we do need to address the kind of the mixed use development standards. So that's why those are in there. And I think just in terms of context, one of the other things that we talked about as a committee is, again, these are for SB 35 projects. There were a few places where we pulled back from, and we kind of talked about, well, you know, to me, this should be areas where it's, if we're doing, and I have gone through the Woodmark as the staff person who had to approve that. So, so I maybe have a little bit different perspective than anybody else here. But just knowing, you know, my own thoughts and the DRB's 2 or 3 meetings on that project and what we didn't have control over when it went through that process. We lost all control over the landscaping, the grading, the architecture, you know, the massing, pretty much everything. So what this does, so that's the SB 35 process. We could, because we only had in place our zoning ordinance, we could regulate height, number of parking spaces, you know, the density, so the number of units, the height, the setbacks, those types of things. We were pretty lucky in that Woodmark only asked for 1 density bonus which concession. They're allowed up to 5 for a 100% affordable project. And that was related to the parking overhang. I think I talked about that when I was doing the legal overview of it. But there are places like Sausalito where they're doing 2 or 3 or 4 different height, stories more than what is allowed in the zoning ordinance. So one of the things that SB 35, what this document tries to do is lay out paths forward for development. It is, yes, it's not cutting edge for sure, but it is hopefully a path forward that is some certainty for developers who might come in to kind of see what the town cares about. So we talked a lot about the heritage trees and the retaining wall heights, and specifically the subcommittee decided, hey, we're going to lower these heights if it's above than what was kind of initially proposed, to say, hey, if it's beyond that, we want to see it. Because if you don't meet these objective standards, then you basically, so from an SB 35 perspective, you would need to meet our zoning ordinance and you would need to meet these standards to get approval. Woodmark just needed to meet the municipal code standards. If you weren't able to, you could still opt to go through the discretionary design standards and go through the DRB process to say, hey, I know my retaining wall is taller. I know I'm not doing, my building is wider or whatever. But I think I'm still meeting the design guidelines. And then in which case this board would be you would again have that discretion. So that's a little bit of the context of why we set how this document works in relationship to your body.
So we would keep the old standards.
Yes, you are not getting
rid.
rid of your discretionary design guidelines. Those will still apply to every other project other than an SB 35 project.
Good.
And so the intent of this was to try to take care of, and the example I always use is minimize grading and minimize retaining walls. Well, what the heck does that mean? Well, there are numbers in this document that tell you exactly what that means. And we went through, cubic yardage per acre. We went through, and I know I talked to Carrie Bush about this a bit too, and used my own experience in a very hilly town, and as well as here with Woodmark, and First Street, and what kind of is an appropriate level of grading. So if they don't meet that, then yes, even the SB 35 projects would either, it's ministerial, which means you either check the box or you don't. So they need to check all of these boxes plus all of our zoning ordinance boxes to be able to get approval. So this is sort of an added layer, not just our zoning ordinance to that. So, and I'm not defending the lack of modernity. I absolutely think there needs to be, some in here. You do end up getting a little bit more of the kind of new urbanism coming through the diagrams. When I was an undergrad, I actually had a project where we were supposed to do urban design standards, and then for something, and then we actually passed them to the person to the right. And that person did the best they could do, the worst they could do, and what a typical developer would do. And so is it stopping good design? And that's definitely something that I really appreciate this body's discussion today about that, of and making sure that the images do promote, good modern design and not just sort of unconsciously direct people towards new urbanism or faux historicism. The developer, just like Woodmark, is going to come in with a more traditional kind of a building. This will probably suit them quite well. You won't get T111. You'll get, some nice durable materials with articulation as needed and that kind of stuff. And then the bad design, well, that's, this is also trying to prevent that really bad design of the 15-foot high retaining wall that was in the Woodmark's first submittal. They didn't end up there, but that was their first submittal. So this would kind of just be hey, there's a no-go there. So that's kind of a little bit more context of this particular document. But yes, for other non-SB 35 projects, you still have your existing design guidelines.
Quick question. If we're going to repeatedly say that this only applies to SB 35, so don't worry, how can we have an assurance that it's not going to get adopted generally in the future? Because I think it is.
Well, I mean, the city council certainly could decide to do that, but I think we can certainly make it clear and we can actually add that into the resolution in some way that kind of stresses that. And we can certainly add that in the staff report that, you know, while this will somewhat limit design, it's appropriate for SB 35 type projects. However, you know, there's a lot more to the design world outside of this that can be done in a discretionary design process that aren't in these guidelines, that are in your regular guidelines. And so we can communicate that to city council. I can't guarantee anything, obviously, but I mean, they could choose to disband the DRB tomorrow if they wanted to. I don't think there's, you know, I haven't heard anything about that, but, and I would certainly fight to maintain design review in the city of Sebastopol. I think as development pressures come in, we definitely need to make sure that it's compatible and that we grow in a, I might think of the right word, but a compatible way. So I'm going to repeat that word just because.
Well, I think it's something to consider. And possibly in our resolution, some notation about it.
And we're here to take input from the board.
Because-
And so I think, Chair Lambert, I'll let you facilitate conversation on, you know, we got a lot of different direction from folks. We didn't hear if you want us to go forward with that and any other direction for staff.
Right, yep. It feels like we're not quite there yet. But, so Lynn, did you have any other comments at the moment or?
No.
Okay, thanks. So just, I guess we started with Carrie. So Christine, I know you've spent a lot of time on this. Do you have anything else you want to add at this point?
Well, yeah, I would like to say this. And we just got another little taste of it, but you and I spent time in the committee meetings. I mean, you could spend an eternity picking through and modifying this thing. So I myself personally at this point in time am concerned about more of the broad brush aspects to this and what does it mean and how does it apply. For example, this is so prescriptive. And so then when we were going through the committee meetings, I found myself thinking, boy, this eliminates a lot of opportunity in architectural design by having this. And it's the whole thing, and this is also in the RENA project, has an underlayment of a certain ideology. I mean, it's just in there, which is the high density, get rid of the car, the walkable, the intensity. I think that was the word we used. What does that mean? Does that mean a lot of buildings together? But I mean, I'd like to, consider what this means. Like, what is this? I mean, I go back to the RENA document and you can see plain as day the plan to shift RENA numbers over to West Sonoma County. I mean, you can see it clear as day when you read that. In the next round, they updated their map, what do they call it, opportunity map. And boy, do we go dark blue. So I just feel like I want to consider this thing on a broad brush. And then, getting into these little details, I don't even know how to resolve that because we could go, do I want a 3-foot bush? Do I want a 3'6" bush? I mean, I could go on forever. So I guess I'm kind of being vague here, but I don't know what to say more about it. But the whole big picture that underlays all of this, I find troubling because it's so command and control on the way people are going to live, and not everybody lives that way. It's funny because the TCAC opportunity map was produced by the Othering and Belonging Institute. Do you guys know about that? Probably not. But
I don't know any of that.
But the thing is, I feel like with this whole kind of ideology, there's a lot of people getting othered. It's troubling to me.
So Christina, I'd like to separate the RENA and the TCAC process. That's the tax credit financing for affordable housing. Those are the maps she's referring to. From this discussion, but I'm wondering, Tony, if you can maybe talk a little bit to,
They seem to be
you know,
joined at the hip, the RENA numbers and the requirement, like we get a certain number we need to meet. We've got our SB 35, we've got to get these units in here, right? We get bumped up, next round comes, here comes another Woodmark.
so we don't have another RENA process for 8 years. I spent a lot of time talking with ABAG during the last round. I hope to be here to do that for the next round.
Personally, you're like a hero to me, what you
but-
did. You're like a hero to me.
But again, I want to separate the RENA, a housing target, from how we're doing design in our community. So that's kind of the focus of this, because I want us to stay on track and make sure we're making progress, and that we in Opticos have direction from this body at the end of this meeting. And so, Tony, I'm wondering if you could maybe talk a little bit to your experience with the objective design standards being too prescriptive versus not enough, and how that works, and what your experience is.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and first of all, thank you for all of your comments and thoughts and insights into the document. And before I respond to this, I just want to say, just checking back on my notes, I do remember the large vehicle parking and the bird safety and the copper. I remember those 3 items specifically that we agreed that those would be removed. And I apologize that they haven't been. I don't know why that happened, but I take responsibility for that. So we'll go through the entire document and make sure that other things were not missed. But I do remember those, Christine, that we talked about them. So I wanted to communicate on that. The idea of just what you regulate and to what extent, it varies widely, right? We're working on these for the city of Santa Barbara, which is probably the ultimate other extreme. And here's the thing, where every town and city finds itself in California having to comply with these requirements, because that's the thing to remember. Nobody's doing this on their own. They're doing it because the state said only objective requirements can be applied to these projects that apply for the protection of the Housing Accountability Act, or SB 35 project. In your case, the SB 35 projects don't apply. It doesn't apply to you anymore for 4 more years, at least. But the housing accountability protections can still apply. Somebody can come in and say, I'm submitting a project under the HAA, Housing Accountability Act. Under that, and it says you can only apply objective content. And so what cities realized very quickly after these laws were passed is they had their staffs thumb through their zoning codes, and they all sat around the table and said, oh man, of the 100% content that is in our zoning code, about 15% of it is actually objective, and the rest of it is not, because it's very difficult, as you're all saying correctly. You can't design by formula. It's a matter of process. And so cities have been doing this through processes, like the one you guys have through your design review board. So the test or the requirement is you can only apply objective standards. So therein lies the challenge. How far do you go? Because if once cities are faced with the question of, well, if we can't have a say and somebody gets to design the project from, Kansas or anywhere else in the world, they don't have to come to City Hall. They don't have to know anybody. They don't have to talk to anybody. All they are required to do by the law is to apply whatever is deemed objective. And then, you saw that definition from Singe early on today. And so somebody can put all their application together and submit it. And the city is obligated to process it and only apply that objective content. So once you put yourself in that mode, and I'm not saying it as any threat at all, I'm saying it as the reality that all these cities and counties and towns are in, then all of a sudden, things that you wouldn't regulate, things that we would recommend as designers that you wouldn't regulate, we find ourselves regulating. Because if you don't, you have no say on that topic when that application is submitted. That's why we're talking about so many things that otherwise we would not. And so I don't know what word to use, empathize, identify, whatever it is. We get it, that it's a hard thing to come to. But if you don't do something, and again, Santa Barbara is extreme, and then there are other ends of that spectrum where, like Lafayette, another option is to simply, I would encourage you to look at their checklist. I don't recommend it for Sebastopol, understanding the design sensitivities that you have and that you should have, but that is another option, is to simplify it down to that. But remember, somebody preparing an application somewhere else that doesn't have to come and talk to you and meet with the mayor or whoever else, or the planning commission, and get an idea for the design sensitivities of a particular site. Once you don't have to do that, then anything you ever wanted has to be on paper and it has to be objective. And that's why we're in the case that we're in. So I again, if you met us on any other day, other than talking about objective standards, you would understand that we see that. We don't recommend to regulate all these topics on any given day. But in California, for multifamily projects and mixed use projects that are at least 2/3 housing, that is the law, unfortunately. So yeah, and again, I just give you, I guess, one last observation or thought, having worked on a lot of these. In California, they're called objective standards. Other states are starting to do this, but not to the full extent that California has. But that's probably just a matter of time. Washington State is right behind California with objective standard requirements, but not for all buildings, only what they call middle housing. So buildings of 2 units up to, I think, maybe 8 units. I can't remember the cap that legally the statute ends at. But it's all in the name of, well, it's all because the state has determined, the state of Washington, the state of California, they have determined that cities and towns and counties have become obstacles to housing production. And so that's what those laws, the preamble of those laws is what it states in the beginning, that because of that, they have to do this requirement for objectivity. Anyway, I would just give you this, I guess, this guidance as you think about what should we regulate and to what extent. Think about the kind of developer that's going to use this process. I don't know that there's a profile of what those developers are like, because there's not enough of these projects to really determine that. But I would encourage you to talk to somebody like a permit expediter, some plan reviewer, or a city that sees a lot of these applications, and ask them what's the trend of the type of developer that uses these standards. And those applicants, by and large, are going to be, just from the little bit that we've gleaned from interviews of other cities, those applicants tend to be the kind that do have a total formula of a building, and they don't want anybody messing with it, and they want to plop it down wherever they want to plop it down. And so they're going to use standards that take people the uncertainty. So the contrast to predictability, I know that word can be very offensive to designers. We get that, but that word is meant to say the outcomes are knowable, and that the outcomes have been designed to be related. I won't use the word compatible. The outcomes in such a system are intended to be related to what you already have. That's the intent. And the opposite of that is uncertainty. And so that's what the development community is complaining to Sacramento and Olympia and Washington, that there's too much uncertainty. And so you get this mandate to have objective standards. So I'll stop there, but it's just a question of, now that you're in that we're all in that predicament, even the city where I live. But that predicament puts you in a different mode of entertaining topics to be regulated that you otherwise wouldn't regulate.
Thank you, Tony. I think that's helpful background, and that, I mean,
Yeah.
it's the
not.
jurisdictions being a roadblock, which is why the whether or not you're meeting your RENA targets, your housing targets or not, are the criteria for whether or not you're subject to SB 35 or not. So basically, we met our RENA targets for the last round. Therefore, at the state, they see that we are not being a roadblock because we are producing the housing that is the goal they set for us. So therefore, we're not subject to it. But as most of you know, the cities don't develop housing, so we have very little control over how many units are actually created. And frankly, the only reason we were able to meet our RENA was because of the Sebastopol in transition to Elderberry Commons. We were able to count those 31 units of very low income housing. And so, that we actually had more than our share of, by a couple of units of very low. And those counted towards the low, which we were, I think, a couple of units shy on. And same with our moderate, we had a couple of units more. We did not do the target for a market rate, the above moderate. But the excess from those lower units count towards a higher cost housing. So overall, we met our targets. We're not subject to this. But again, as Tony noted, the Housing Accountability Act that I described earlier, having this does help for that. And so, yeah, when I was reviewing these, I was kind of reviewing in the, are you stopping good design? Are you stopping bad design? What's the typical developer? And for my typical developer, I use the Woodmark project as a good example, or some of the other larger projects where it's, someone comes in and they're not interested in site-specific design kind of a thing. And that's kind of how I read this document would this help with this? So.
Carrie, can I just offer one more thing on that? So Santa Barbara is a good example in this way. I mean, they're trying as well. I know that they have their reputation of regulating everything, but now they're in this mode of having to have these objective standards on paper, just like every other jurisdiction in California. They've said that the work group of architects there, which is probably like 20, they have a bunch of architects there and other designers, design professionals, and they all said, we understand we have to do this, but developers that come to Santa Barbara want to do more than one project and they want to be invited back. And there are the exceptions, but more often than not, the developers are probably going to choose a discretionary path because they want to do something that requires a little more thought in terms of design, and they don't want to be boxed in. So they think there's no way to know, but they think that applicants are likely going to choose a discretionary path because even though it's tough, they can come out with a project that they can point to and say that's ours and we're very proud of it. And I think that could stand for Sebastopol as well. You have a strong design culture expectation, and that just needs to be communicated in such a way that applicants know that, and that they wouldn't feel scared of using the discretionary path, because somehow that's the message that's come through with these laws is, oh, you should be scared of the discretionary process. And in some cities, I guess you should be, but I don't know if that's necessarily true for Sebastopol. So if it isn't a scary proposition to go through a discretionary process in Sebastopol, that just needs to be reinforced so that the applicants that want to do great projects still can and go through your process.
Thanks, Tony. Thanks for all that explanation. That's really helpful. I mean, there's the law. It's the law we're dealing with here that's coming down from Sacramento and how to best deal with it. And I think part of what I see in the standards, when you get to so many requirements, it could very well just kick projects out of this process right back into the process we're all used to. So that's a positive outcome in a way. And then I think there's a lot of positive stuff in this document as well. And especially if I think of like Redwood Marketplace, like the bigger Safeway, right? We got a bunch of those nobody likes. If those were to be developed, there's some great ideas in the planning of a site like that are in this document. So I think there is a lot here to appreciate, and that would help the city in the end, I think. So I just want to do a time check because I think we have a, council meeting or we have some planning commission after this.
We
right?
have until 5:30 today is what
5:30.
this meeting is scheduled to
Okay,
do, and we do
right.
have a planning commission meeting at 6. Yeah.
6, right, okay. So, so maybe, I mean, I'll recap a little bit and we can certainly, people can still chime in more, but we've had some very specific feedback, like Melissa's great comments that was akin to our committee comments. And we've had more, you two and, or many of us feel like, or maybe everybody but Christine and I haven't had a lot of time to read this. So it feels like we're at a point of continuance in both of those sides, as well as the whole editing, making sure the edits of the document were done correctly. So I don't know
So, Chair Langberg, one of the things that would help me, so we did get direction on a number of things from Melissa to know whether or not that's the consensus of the DRB.
of those specific comments you're saying?
Yes, of the acceptance of modernity, I mean, moving admin up to upfront, I think that is probably fine, but if you have any comments on that, but the things like the allowing perforated metal for mechanical screening instead of just opaque, no articulation needed for retaining walls 50 feet or longer. There were a couple of deletions, the 10-foot planter area in parking areas from Kerry Bush, the not requiring corner elements was one of the comments. And so those comments that Melissa went over, that's one person. So I think it would be helpful for us as staff and Opticus to know whether that's the consensus of the DRB that we should move forward in that direction as we're refining the document.
So to that note, I guess we should ask if there are other specific comments. I think Carrie, for example, you just talked more generally, and if you wanted to add more specific stuff, or Christine for that matter. But
I just want to say that, Lars and I's had a lot of time to go through this very specifically, and I think we should, give our other board members just more time to come up with comments, because it's just such a meaty document for such a short period. So, I mean, they could maybe have more comments. I feel like Lynn and Marshall didn't really have the opportunity to produce a list like Melissa, which is understandable because it was such a short period of time. Whereas with me, I'm like, okay, I already sort of commented what I'm going to comment. That's not fair to everybody else on the board, in my opinion.
Well, so to your question, Carrie, I mean, so we can do another 10, 15, 20 minutes of specific comments, and then there's that group of comments. We could, I guess, as a board, agree on those or disagree on those, and then still come back for the next meeting open to more comments. Is that, or we, because if we agree, some people, or we all need more time, do we just sort of, come next meeting, we say, here's all these comments. Do we all agree or not agree on the bulk of them? I don't know what's the best process of that. But.
So Tony, I don't know if you have any thoughts. I mean, I think in terms of discussion, we probably don't need Opticus at the next meeting. I think we, the context of things, but Tony, just in terms of the edits, I mean, I definitely want to make sure we go through and pick up the edits that the design subcommittee had sooner rather than later, because I think there are a number of things that to get that in front of the board would be helpful. And then, of course, Lars and Christine will want to kind of review those with their own notes. But just in terms of other comments, to me, if it's strike articulation on walls, that's an easy thing to just put a strike through on it and then do the final edit later before it goes to council. So we can kind of do it that way. And so if there are and we can either incorporate the changes that were directed now and bring that back, but it might be easier also to just get them all, do them all as strikeout or underline if it's it's kind of how I'm used to doing ordinances. So it's a little bit easy to say strike out for something that's deleted, underline for new text or replacement text, and then kind of track it as that. Is that acceptable to folks? So we can kind of track the comments from today, but not do the actual, no red line version of it until we have all of your comments and all of planning commission's comments, and it goes to council.
That makes sense to me. Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
So sorry, just to recap, your recommendation is that we go up into our corners, make our final comments, we'll come back together, we'll put up the document live and literally edit it together as a group and have consensus on it.
I think so.
I love
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
great.
And we can kind of John knows how to use Adobe now with the editing. We can kind of put in, your comments from today, assuming all of board members agree. And so that's kind of the stuff I'm trying to get today is that, that they're, and I will say in terms of the imagery, if there's good photographers out there, which I am not, but I know at least one member of the DRB who's a good photographer, if you want to take pictures of things that you think should be examples and swapped out for particular photos, you don't need to. I know that's asking a lot, but if there are definitely examples you want to have included, definitely send those to us and we can get those swapped out.
I have one more thing that I think it would be nice if we discussed or thought about, and I'm not sure if you guys have or not because we didn't discuss it, but the concept is a very fascinating concept in this document about I'm going to call it the site design, but this is where you have a bigger site and you're not subdividing. And
Yeah, Lars spoke about that a little bit ago,
Yeah.
the large sites at like the Redwood Marketplace.
Right,
Yeah.
but I'd like to talk a little bit more about what this is. We had that whole discussion with Tony where we hypothetically put the roads in
Mhm.
and we had the different types of buildings in it, but it's not a subdivision. You
Right.
would normally see individual lots. This is one lot doing this. And I thought that was a very interesting topic and something to consider, what that means exactly and how that would apply to some of these state laws, I guess. But I'm just,
Yeah, and I think in terms of state laws, if it's objective, that's your objective standard and they have to comply
right,
with
but
it.
it's a different kind of way of thinking about things, as opposed to having individual lot ownership and individual ownership. You have one property with different types of things on it. Since it's one property, I suppose hypothetically owned by one entity.
Yeah,
not-
so like the Woodmark project would actually, given the size of that, would actually be subject to that large site. So instead of kind of the big, it's not really divided in a way that is in any way campus-like. Yeah, exactly.
Well, this makes like this kind of thinking made like a little neighborhood. And what Tony brought out in one of our discussions was where we're like, well, how many lots do we have? But then he brought up the concept of combining existing lots so that you could get something to the size where you could actually make something. Because even on Woodmark, I think I suppose you could go, but it would be hard to make the street, the layout that we described when we talked about Redwood Marketplace.
Right, but for instance, the Woodmark site, that was 2 lots that were merged,
Right.
Purchased and merged. And if it was just the individual lots, it would not have been subject to that large site. But once they combined them, it would be. And so this actually, that whole chapter, I actually very much appreciated because it's less about ownership and more about scale. So.
Well, this is what I'm thinking forward about, because you get used to, you live in a town as long as I have, you get used to that's that property, and that's that property, but you can combine them. Hadn't really considered that before, and start to make these types of developments.
If I could just add to that, Christine, the other thing that it lets you do, let's say it's one existing parcel that's either been merged or is large enough to do this, it gives the owner the option downstream, once they've built this, or even as they're building it, they can now parcel off pieces to sell that are compliant with your standards and deliver the scale that you want, as opposed to somebody doing that before and then having this remnant property and people saying it's too small. But if you if you plan it using that design set approach that you're talking about, it actually enables somebody to sell it in a way that's compliant.
Yes, and I think it's a really interesting way to think about things. So, thank you, Tony.
Thanks, Christine. So I would say, Carrie, you still have an opportunity to just go through some specifics, and then maybe from that, if we want to, we could talk about do we as a board want to just say, yes, those are all good, or if there's anybody has an objection, any of the ones that went over, and then sort of wrap that up and come back with more comments next time.
Yeah, I think we're moving on time here, but ultimately, I'd love this continuance. I love what's been discussed. I love a lot of what's been said, specifically by board member Ms. Hanley, and I also feel that the notion of we're designers, and we always joke that constraints are a designer's best friend, right? That's our joke, and these provide maybe guidelines as constraints, so there's a great document that's there and it's almost there. So we're getting closer to being there. And I think recognizing the site specific design items that, Ms. Level discussed is a really important aspect, especially from my end. I can't provide any further, more specific comments to the document without reviewing it more. So the continuance makes even more sense to me. And that's what I have to say.
That's great. Yeah, thank you. So, Carrie, you're saying even though there's going to be more comments, you would like at least some direction on what we've heard today.
Yeah. So, and Tony, let me just ask you. So, in terms of we know there's some comments from the meetings that need to be picked up. Are those things that you'd like to redline in the existing kind of PDF document, the way you strike out, underline with the changed languages, like the wood, the wood species, that would be striking out the Brazilian cherry, but adding in bamboo or some, I don't think it was bamboo, but there were a couple, black walnut, a couple that we had gone over as the committee. So you don't have to repaginate and reformat everything, but we pick up those comments, then we can add in the comments from this meeting that we did get. And while you're all kind of mulling over, you have the document. We'll get that out to you as quickly as we can, but making sure that we're going through and making sure that it's thoroughly vetted in terms of the edits. And then your August meeting could then reflect.
I wonder if it makes sense to hold on making any edits until we all have had a chance to go through it in detail, because I don't think it's fair to ask anybody who hasn't gone through to say yeah, Melissa's ideas are straight on.
Okay. Yeah. So then we should just do, and we'll just do it as the strikeout underline, but make sure we pick up any of the, go through like I said, we have those recorded, and I think we can run them through Universal Translator just to kind of have the checklist of stuff to make sure we've hit everything and made all of those edits and get that out to the board. And then we'll pick that up and the rest of the comments at the August meeting. Okay.
Sounds good. Yeah.
Tony, does that work for you guys?
Yeah, I just want to make sure what we're expected to do. So for the version that we're giving you back, it would have, we would strike out so you could still see it, so it doesn't change the paging. So we would strike out the content that was supposed to be removed, and at least those 3 topic areas that I remember, and then maybe any others that you catch. But we'll go through and look at it again. So that's what we're doing, and then sending it back to you, right?
Yeah, just the edits that the subcommittee had done to make sure that the document is in final order at the end of those meetings.
But comments from today are still to be developed through the board.
Right. We're going to we're getting direction to wait on those further comments until next meeting. Yep.
Okay. So we will talk internally and then get back to you tomorrow morning with a date when we can send that back to you, but it should be soon.
Can we get a commitment that somebody's going to rewatch the video of those recorded sessions with the subcommittee, so that we can make sure all those comments there were enough misses that I'm not confident that.
Right. And that's where I'm saying, you can, there are softwares that will do a transcript, which is probably the easiest way to kind of have a list, and then you can actually just go through It's a little bit actually easier. I mean, I find it's a little easier having used those for minutes for meetings to go through and actually track and, cross out as you've made the edits. But yeah, I think that's one of the two.
Okay.
and then you can watch
I
the
think it
video
would
if
be
there's
good to
any.
have
Yeah.
somebody say that, yes, we will do that on the Optico side, or
Yeah, we're going to take care of it.
sweet. Okay. We like
Yeah, we
accountability.
would, yeah. Again, I'm embarrassed to say that we missed it, but obviously we did.
That's fine. Okay, thanks, Tony. Yeah, I mean, well, it's a big document. There was lots of meetings, and and then you had mentioned, Carrie, whether next meeting Opticos even necessarily needs to be part of that if we're just going through the specific text. It was great. I mean, it's great to have them here, certainly for the initial presentation, but also a lot of the, bigger picture explanations were really great. So I don't know, you guys can talk about that again.
Yeah, we can, let me talk about that. I do need to make sure we have it in their scope. So,
Yeah, I just want to make the comment that I find Tony to be a huge help. And so anytime he's around, I'm happy. So,
And we want to make sure you're happy, Christine. So I guess do we need a motion to continue? Is that what that-
Yes, if you
the
would,
official,
please.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So given everything we've heard, it seems like we are continuing this topic to the next meeting. Could I have a motion to that effect from someone? Anyone?
Yeah, I'll make a motion to, I guess, continue this
Second.
discussion for the ODS objective design. And there's a second.
That's great.
Any
Can we
further
call-
discussion?
Can we call any further discussion? Can we call a vote?
Lynn Needler. Marshall Balf. Lars Langberg.
Aye.
Melissa Hanley.
Hi.
Carrie Bush.
Aye.
And Christine Lovell.
aye.
All right, that motion passes 6-0.
All right, so thank you for all that great discussion. The only other item on the agenda is a subcommittee updates, which I think we've just
that
had
is your
whole thing, kind of.
subcommittee, so I think you're good.
So we will,
comment about the flies so we don't
look
totally
Oh, yeah.
absurd up here.
the video will have lots of flapping.
Yeah, Tony, we weren't frustrated. We
Nice
weren't
comments
frustrated.
from
There's like this fly that keeps buzzing, like round and round, making the rounds here.
The nature of living is really in effect.
There you go.
All right.
Where are
thanks.
those swallows?
So with that, we'll adjourn. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Bye.
Recording stopped.